We are prepared to start with agenda item number 20, Basin Directors Reports. We'll start out with Colorado River Main Stem, Director George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. With the bit of snow that we've gotten pretty much statewide, it's a little more fun talking about water supply today than it has been all year. So I've got some numbers I'll share. The numbers downstream in the river haven't changed much. Lake Mead is sitting at less than 40%. I don't think it's changed much. Lake Powell is sitting at 58% of capacity. Total system active storage is at 54. And the 2017 total active storage was 49%. So in many ways of speaking, those are not very comforting numbers, but they are what they are, and they've been staying about in that ballpark. The SNOTEL numbers for the Colorado Basin as of yesterday shows that basin at 78% of normal. So no surprise there. And I think that includes probably some of the new snowfall. So that'd be a minimum if it doesn't. It'd be more than that today. But what's interesting when you look at the basin, if you see any sketches of it, you can kind of draw a line of I-70 across, and you look north of it, and the average snow water equivalent will vary from 73 to 80%. But if you look south, then it really drops pretty fast. And no surprises there. And the low is 39%, and it only gets up to about 60% across the southern half of the state. Though storage continues to look pretty good, it's as of the end of December for the Colorado Basin was still sitting above average, 113%. It was 106% this time last year. So at least we have the cushion. If there's ever any doubt about the value of storage, here's a quick way to end that debate. Because if all forecasts are right, we're going to stay dry. We're going to need this. So that's what storage is really supposed to be all about. Another interesting thing about the basin is that these numbers in the 70s and 80s, and in fact, even some stream flow forecasts are up in the 90s. But then you can go over to the Roaring Fork Valley, and those numbers drop to the low 60s. If you go to the Plateau Creek side, which is the north drainage of the Grand Mesa, it drops down to I think 16%. So it really drifts fast when you head downstream in the Colorado River. So I thought those numbers were an interesting mix. But anyway, the good news is that storage is doing well. In terms of the work of the Colorado Basin Roundtable, through November, December, as I may have mentioned to you, because of construction of the bridge in Glenwood, the decision had been made to be elsewhere for a couple months. 1 month we were up in Kremling looking at projects there. In December we went down to Palisade, 15-mile reach, met with a number of folks there, the Grand Valley users, Grand River, I guess it's Grand Valley Canal, Orchard Mesa system, all of that. Very important collection of water structures. Good meeting, good. It's always good to get out, as we know, and meet our constituents. Then for the month of January, the group has met twice. We usually meet every other month as a full-blown Basin Roundtable meeting. That occurred yesterday in conflict with us, but that's just the way the calendar worked. And then we do on the alternate month, we do next steps, usually a phone in, or those who are nearby can come in. So we're really doing substantial work one day every month, which is good. So some of the items on the agenda yesterday, I haven't gotten report about decision making, but just as a flavor of what's going on there, of course, always have in the pipeline a number of grants. There's an Eagle River watershed application, a town of Carbondale application involving changing a headgate structure on a ditch that goes through town, and Middle Colorado Watershed Council. And that one's interesting. I'll mention it. Middle Colorado River, it isn't defined anywhere, but it actually is a pretty sensible focus now, because you could say essentially from dot zero, where you have the confluence of the Colorado and the Eagle, and then all the way through past Glenwood, where you have the Roaring Fork, the Frying Pan, and then just a series of creeks, most of which dry up in the summertime. So it's that middle area going clear through DeBeck Canyon. It's much attention. And so the Middle Colorado Watershed Council is wanting to focus some attention on that reach for some analysis. So that I think that's interesting. And the first thing they did, I guess, at the meeting yesterday was to have a presentation made about the Eagle River Memorandum of Understanding. Now, some of you will remember that goes back, I think, to the late 1990s. Aurora, Colorado Springs, Climax Mine, all working with other affected water users. Major agreement and discussion, and has a huge influence on what happens to the river downstream from diversions of importance to these participants in the memo. History is always critical, and so I was very pleased to see them bring in a presenter to talk about that piece of history as they begin to work on watershed planning for everything downstream. So that's good work, and I'm pleased to see that. Otherwise, the roundtable is doing the usuals, a good report on the successful IBCC meeting that we had recently and have talked about. A presentation on the results of the risk study phase 2, and then talk about the next steps on that. The West Slope caucus of all of the West Slope roundtables, I think, has a calendar date pending sometime in the next couple months. So that'll probably happen in the Grand Junction area. And also an item of business, they're thinking of following the lead of other roundtables to hire someone to help with really a lot of the education outreach, some of the work on setting up grants for action, and just kind of the basic office work for the roundtable. So they're thinking that might be a good investment. Really going strong, doing well, good attendance. They're doing what they're supposed to do. So that's about it for me, except that we have to ask the old farmer how we're doing. And so some of you were kind enough to remember that when we asked the farmer to forecast the winter, which we talked about last time we were together, and I may have passed around the maps, and of course the old farmer was correct. He did predict cold and snowy, so all's well there. But the other point that he wanted to make, starting the new year, he just wanted to quote a little nice saying about January. So here's the old farmer starting the year. Another year is opening, and another year is gone. We have passed the darkness of the night. We are in the early morn. That's a nice way to start. Thank you.
Questions for Director George? Thank you for that report. Let's move to the San Juan, San Miguel, Dolores River Basin. Director Hawkins.
Good morning. Though I appreciate Director George's optimism about the winter, I have to say that in my basin, we are struggling to maintain hope about the snowpack this year. I had been watching the combined snow tells in the basin before and after the storm last week, and the discussion that we're having now is climbing out of 20% of average into the higher 30% of average in the combined basins. It's not shared equally across the basins. Some of the basins are a lot drier than that. We had a really good article come out in our water information program about this that I'm happy to share with the board. There are interviews with different water managers and forecasters that tell you a lot about what we're expecting in the basin, but we're starting to see comparisons to 1977 and 2002. We're going into the year with better storage than that. But to give you an illustration of what it's like to live in southwestern Colorado, here are a few things that have happened over the winter. Over the holidays, in my neighborhood at 7,500 feet, we had a grass fire that was started by some children playing with Christmas presents. That's pretty unusual. Usually we'll have 5 to 10 foot snow drifts at that point in the year. Our local ski areas are making snow and staying open, but the one that I patrol at does not have snowmaking and is still not open at this point. So when you think about the impact on our local mountain towns and our tourist economies, the lack of snow is hitting hard right now. And as we're looking into the water year this year, again, we have good storage where we have it in the basin from a good year last year, but in the basins that don't have as much storage, I'm already hearing concerns about hay prices and availability because the feed is already being used in the winter. So things look pretty grim right now. We're hopeful that we will get storms in February and March, but the forecast is still looking pretty dry. So at the risk of being the bearer of bad news, you know, it is a very tough water and snow year in the Southwest Basin. Turning to the recent Basin Roundtable meeting, we met on January 10th. We had a workshop leading into the Basin Roundtable meeting. The workshop was focused on funding. We had excellent presentations from the Southwest District, from CWCB staff, and from reclamation staff that was intended to help project proponents in the basin figure out how to match various funding sources together, and I found it very useful. The roundtable meeting was very busy. We covered a lot of the same issues that Director George mentioned, including the risk study and other updates. I think for me, the highlight of the meeting is the number of WSRF and other applications that came through the roundtable. We are going to be busy here in March looking at those applications, and we saw a really wide variety of projects and purposes. We had a municipal project, an environmental project, a raw water project, a stream management plan, and a multi-purpose irrigation project. So I was really excited to see that many applications coming forward for big projects in our basin. Coming up, we have some public education and outreach workshops that are being planned. We heard about some of them yesterday. The Colorado Ag Water Alliance is putting on 2 workshops next week in Mancos and Lewis, and then we are going to have a stream management plan workshop in the middle of February in Durango. So despite having a really tough water year, a lot is going on at the Basin Roundtable, and I really look forward to workshops in the next few weeks.
Questions for Director Hawkins? Thank you for that report. Let's move to the Gunnison River Basin. Director McLeod.
Andrew's going to put up some graphic for me. The record. I'm going to talk to you a little bit, as Director George and Director Hawkins did, about the hydrology in the Gunnison Basin. And hydrology is always an exciting topic, I think, but for me, it's a lot easier to see the pictures than to try to understand the numbers just when you throw them out there. This is the current state of storage in our major reservoirs, which when you look at the teacups, they look to be relatively full, but that's because the Bureau of Reclamation, which manages those reservoirs, has been reducing releases almost every 2 weeks over the course of the winter to try to hold some storage. 2 weeks ago, they cut the releases from Blue Mesa by 50% based on the forecasts for what's coming. So the almost good news is there's relatively good storage. The teacups that look the most full are the smallest reservoirs, so that's another indication. Go ahead, give me the next one. Now, the next three slides show you the precipitation in western Colorado. The blue circle is the Gunnison Basin. That is October. Go ahead. And then November. And you can see on the left that dark brown is the bad news. And then go ahead to the next one. That's December. January is all brown, by the way. Go ahead. So this is what we're looking at for the flows in runoff. And you can see down the bottom what the different colors represent. 2002 is sort of the aquamarine one, which is notably one of the worst years on record, at least in recent history in the Gunnison Basin. And you can see 2018 is the dark blue on the far left, just creeping up below the 2002 graph. Go ahead, one more. And this is the forecasted April-July runoff for the major rivers in the basin. And if you look, this is percentage of the last 30-year average. And you can see 100% is farther to the right. You can see what the distance is between what they forecast at the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center and the average. So we're looking at some pretty dire predictions for the forecast for the Gunnison Basin in terms of spring runoff. That's it. The Gunnison Basin Roundtable is meeting every other month. There was a meeting last week on Monday. A lot of discussion about funding and whether or not the forecasted reduction in funding for Water Supply Reserve Fund and water plan grants, whether the roundtable needs to adjust its priorities. The screening committee was interested in hearing from the entire roundtable whether the group as a whole thought that they were applying the right standards. Did we need to look at different standards or establish different priorities for the grants? The basin fund at the moment is fairly healthy, but there are a lot of projects in the pipeline that will suck that up pretty fast, and there is a concern that maybe we need to spread it out over the next couple of years, because the numbers that we saw yesterday from Kirk were pretty much what I expected to see. So those are pretty basically what I explained to the roundtable is what we would be seeing. That is, the $2 million into the Water Supply Reserve Fund would be the maximum. So a lot of discussion about that. We came to know the roundtable decided to wait until the January numbers came out and then take a look at those priorities and make decisions about how applications for grants would be prioritized. We did have a conversation about the risk study and the results that have come from that. And the roundtable is committed to going to phase 3 of the risk study, which will dig a little deeper into events that could accompany curtailment. And as Director George says, the 4 West Slope roundtables are tentatively scheduling a joint meeting, which will be, at the moment, it's planned for either April 24 or 25 in Grand Junction. This board gave a significant grant to the Upper Gunnison District for its watershed planning activity, and that activity is moving forward very vigorously. I shared with you earlier the brochure that's being used to educate the public about that activity. There have been several meetings of the planning group. It is now meeting on a regular monthly basis at a scheduled time so that all the participants can plan on it, put it on their calendar, and be present. We have excellent cooperation, participation from the Stock Growers Association, which in a basin where 95% of the consumptive use is agriculture, it's extremely important to have the producers on board, and they've definitely become enthusiastic and involved and participating on a regular basis, giving lots of great information to our basin coordinators. Wilson Water Group is our technical participant under contract, and they have done an extensive analysis of consumptive use in the 3 sub-basins that we're focusing on to begin with, but also throughout the entire basin. And this involves sitting down one-on-one with the water commissioners with the GIS up on the screen. We have a screen this size in our boardroom, and going through each diversion structure one by one to make sure that the diversion records are accurate and that the irrigated acreage is accurate, and that the 2 are connected correctly. And they've covered these 3 sub-basins extensively. The District 59 commissioner, which is the East River, basically it's the Gunnison River from Blue Mesa Dam up to the headwaters, spent 2.5 days with Aaron Wilson going through those diversion records and compiling accurate consumptive use for those agricultural diversions. So the data collection is working very well. We've circulated the questionnaires that I showed you in the folders, getting very good response on those questionnaires. Lots of people are getting interested and joining up, and it's building some momentum, which is what we had hoped for. So that work is working out very well. It's been quite successful. I'm very pleased at the way it worked out, and we want to say thank you again to this board for the grant that gave us the ability to proceed. And that, Mr. Chairman, is my report.
Questions for Director McLeod? Thank you for that report. Let's move to the North Platte Basin. Things aren't too bad for us. Actually, things are pretty good. You've heard me say that numerous times. We're sitting at about 80%, so that 100% is within reach. We're optimistic until usually the bitter end. The 94%, that is our total year-to-date precipitation, so actually that is pretty good. A couple things. Our roundtable, we've met recently, approved a application from numerous folks. It's kind of a package deal to renew 4 diversion structures, so we were pretty happy about that. That fits well into our basin implementation plan. Another thing I did want to touch on somewhat, and this goes back to our snowpack. I have in the past, Director George, doubted somewhat of your almanac's accuracy, but I need to back up and say I'm a believer nowadays. I really do appreciate that book of yours. So, I saw that on the old farm. Thank you. One other thing before I do close. I do have some gifts for the board before we leave today, so that hopefully will entice you to stick around a little bit. Nancy was, she said, you really ought to do something. Those folks have put up with you for 6 years, so you really ought to do something. There was, and when you open these, you'll kind of wonder. She helped me pick this stuff, and I was kind of like, huh, okay, well, I think it's a good idea, but when I went and I picked them up from this gentleman that we do quite a bit of business with, and he said, "Does your wife really make you mad?" And I said, "Well, no, I think I've been behaving myself for quite a while, because it's a gift that you'll wonder is why she sent me to Denver with all these gifts, and it's something that it could potentially hurt me if somebody wasn't really in a good mood." So just a little bit of a kind of a teaser thing. When you get into it, you'll understand this. But with that, I will stop. Any questions? And if not, thank you for allowing me to give you the report. Let's move to the South Platte River Basin. Director Jan.
All right. Thanks, Chairman Wattenberg. I'm sufficiently enticed to stay for the full day to see what your wife gave us as gifts. So that was a good tease. On the South Platte Basin, we're doing pretty well. We surpassed the North Platte Basin in snowpack. We're at 88% today. So we're one of the better places. I think the state as a whole is at 63%. So we're at 88. So we're not doing too bad. The storage in our reservoirs is very good. And that happened early on. We filled most of our Plains reservoirs in December to their winter fill. Really, our reservoir, the North Sterling, is the only one that's still running with under ice, which can pose some difficulty, but we do that every year. So we're trying to fill our reservoir. We're about at 81% full. So we'll continue to operate and try to get our reservoir full, which we will. Probably around the first part of March. All the other reservoirs are fairly good. We have a call on the South Platte River right downstream of Denver, 1910, and that's to fill the Horse Creek Reservoir. So there's two reservoirs, Horse Creek and Prospect, smaller reservoirs, but part of the Henry Lynn Irrigation District that are trying to fill, and that's filled through the Burlington Canal, which also fills Bar Lake. So they fill three reservoirs from the one canal, and they're filling the last two there. So there is a call on the river. And downstream of that, there is no call and hasn't been for some time. So so the river looks good right now at Kersey, which is where I usually look at the river, and that's where the confluence of all the tributaries come in. The Pooter comes in right upstream of Kersey. So that's the gauge that I watch. Average flow there is around 640 CFS. We have 869 today. So we're doing a little bit better, and partly that's because all the reservoirs are filled upstream. There's a couple other reservoirs that can take water upstream of there, which would lower the average flow in that section. But right downstream of our reservoir, there's what we call the Balzac gauge, and it's one of the gauging stations. And 50 CFS there. At the state line, we have 2,532 CFS there. So we increase in that stretch 1,500 CFS. And that's about 82 miles of river. So on average, there's about 18 CFS per mile that's coming back to the river. So that kind of leads me into the next thing, which we're going to hear about the storage study this afternoon on the South Platte. And it was a good study. The engineers did a very good job at looking at all the options for the storage study. It's part of House Bill 1256, which was passed a couple of years ago. And so that's good. But the storage study, which if you dig into it, will show that there's more water available downstream just because of those return flows. So right at Denver, we're drying the river, and there's 2,500 going out of the state. So there's certain locations where there is water available, and that's what the storage study kind of points out. So the other thing to keep in mind is there's really no way to capture all the water in the river, especially from snow melt and rain events, unless you have an on-stream reservoir. And of course, that was one of the things that was looked at, the Narrows Reservoir site. The feasibility of permitting that is pretty low, but it shows that that's really the only way that you can capture all that water. Other than that, you need several diversion points along the way, and even then, sometimes the river's too large to capture that water. So there's going to be some water go out of the state unless you have an on-stream reservoir. So we'll hear about that later. Because we had a presentation, a short presentation at our last roundtable meeting about that. Other roundtable news, we have a new chairperson. Garrett Vara took the place of Sean Conway. And Garrett is one of our he's one of our industrial reps. He is part of Vara Industries, which does gravel pit mining and storage. So he's a great addition. He's been there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and he's very interested in the roundtable. And so we're happy to have him as our new chairperson. And we also have our roundtable coordinator, which is just getting up and started last year. We funded for the South Platte and Metro together, and she's just getting up and running. Her name is Lacey Williams, and she's doing a good job trying to learn all the acronyms that we use in the water industry, which is kind of overwhelming at times. And I guess with that, I'll end my report.
Questions for Director Yon? Thank you for that report. Let's move to the Arkansas River Basin. Director Goebel.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So the Arkansas Basin Roundtable met 2 weeks ago in Pueblo, where we approved 5 water supply reserve grant requests that will come before this board in March. Our basin funds are a little slim, but we should be good to stretch that out for a while. So we'll see how that goes. We heard a report from our IBCC reps that the November meeting went well and that they were looking forward to the future meetings this year to continue those discussions. There was also a discussion on what types of presentations the roundtable would like to see in the coming year. And there was a request to have CWCB and or AG staff provide a refresher course and an update on the current Colorado River matters and possible outcomes and what effect they might have on the Arkansas Basin water users. We have a fair amount of new roundtable members, so we'd appreciate having a course on that just to get them halfway up to speed. And Brent Newman is planning to set something up sometime this spring, so looking forward to that. The Arkansas River Compact Administration held their annual meeting between Colorado and Kansas in early December in Lamar. The meeting appeared to go off without a hitch, in large part because of all the planning and preparation done by Brent Newman, Director Mitchell, Eric Skye, a lot of Division II staff members, and many others. At that meeting, Colorado Parks and Wildlife asked for approval for a second year of the resolution passed last May that allowed them to a new water right, the Highland Ditch, to be stored in the Fish and Wildlife Permanent Pool. So this new source helped them maintain the permanent pool last year, and they're hoping to get approval from Kansas a little earlier this year to allow them to catch more of the runoff. Prior to that, they're only allowed to store a small water right they have on Muddy Creek, which doesn't produce a whole lot, or Colorado River water. And so this new resolution helped the permanent pool quite a bit. Also, Colorado presented a proposal to Kansas to add a new 40,000 acre-feet storage account to John Martin Reservoir, which we're calling the Colorado Water Users Account. And this proposal, which was funded by a CWCB grant, so thanks to this board for that, recommends a new storage account to provide storage for 9 different entities, the cities of Lamar and La Junta, 4 well augmentation groups, 2 water conservancy districts, and an electric utility. And so it'd be a big benefit to Colorado, and we hope there are some that Kansas agrees with us that there'll be enough benefit to Kansas to have them agree to this new account. So both states plan to meet during 2018 to discuss the details of this account. So we're looking forward to that. Update on hydrology in the basin. Similar story, I guess. In the snowpack race, we're kind of somewhere in mid-pack. We're sitting about 60% of median as of Sunday, and so that's about half of what we had this time last year. So definitely not great, and we've got our fingers crossed for more snowfall soon. The U.S. Drought Monitor shows that the Arkansas Basin has slipped back into a moderate drought designation, and it's definitely been a dry fall and winter. So that's the bad news. The good news is that all of the major reservoirs are storing at or above their averages. Pueblo Reservoir is currently storing 260,000 acre feet, which is 16% above what it had this time last year and 150% of average. So the highest the reservoir has ever been was February 12th of 96, when it had a little over 283,000 acre feet. And I talked with the Bureau of Reclamation, I guess the end of last week, and they said that they'll likely surpass that level in about 6 weeks. So it'll be within what they call a first fill condition, and it'll be have to be under 24-hour watch for safety reasons, just because it's never been at that level. So with all that being said, the reservoir does have a high probability of spilling this spring. I should have brought my graph like I brought a couple months ago to show where we're at now, but the reservoir spills at about 311,000 acre feet. So I'm not sure we're going to get to that level, but we have to be down to 245 by April 15th. And like I mentioned, we're already at 260. So several groups have already started, well, throughout the whole winter, have been moving water out of Pueblo into other reservoirs and recharge facilities to try to lessen the spill. If the reservoir does spill, the owners of this of the water spilled would lose dominion and control, and it would be considered native flow. Most of it would probably end up in John Martin Reservoir under what they call conservation storage there. And it is currently sitting at 283,000 acre feet, which is 140% above what it had this time last year and 240% of average. So it's got a lot of water compared to normal. And that being said, it doesn't spill until a little over 330,000 acre feet. So we still have almost 50,000 acre feet of available storage space in John Martin Reservoir. So we're happy to have all the water in storage. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that'll complete my report.
Questions for Director Goebel? Thank you for that report. Let's move to City and County of Denver. Director Wells.
Graphic. I'll start with to talk about it. That's it for my drawings. So a lot has been going on. We at Denver Water, we're still the sponsor of an application to the Water Quality Control Commission to expand uses of recycled water under Reg 84. We've been involved for a year in a stakeholder process. It has been rough going. Folks at the division really don't like recycled water in their hearts. So that's been kind of difficult. And there have been a couple of meetings with higher ups at CDPHE, and things have gotten a little better in the last few weeks. But in the meantime, members of the Interim Water Committee held a couple of hearings in August, I believe, and introduced some legislation to add uses legislatively, looking at commercial irrigation, indoor irrigation, primarily grow operations, because they do use an enormous amount of water, toilet flushing, cannabis, other edible crops, community gardens, and there's something else. Some of those bills have been introduced into the legislature. There was a hearing yesterday on the marijuana one, and I think they're looking at amendments. There'll be another hearing next Monday on other uses. So it's been a long slug. As you may remember, the CWCB contributed money to the Water Quality Control Division to do this rulemaking. And well, I don't know if we're getting our money's worth so far. But the hearing is scheduled, the rulemaking hearing is scheduled for August. In the meantime, I imagine some legislation may well pass so that we can get that underway. We are also engaged in water quality issues, Denver Water is, with both Climax on molybdenum and more difficult is Schwarzwälder mine on Ralston Creek. And the Schwarzwälder mine pool seeps into Ralston Creek, which goes into Ralston Reservoir, which goes into our Moffett treatment plant. And I want to compliment Dreams for their help in dealing with Cotter Corporation's latest proposal, which is a great deal if you can do it, to sell or shift the ownership of both Schwarzwälder mine and one in Canyon City to a new LLC. They have other businesses. I forget what it's called. Anyway, it's an organization that reclaims property. They don't have another business, so I'm not sure where their revenue comes from, except that Cotter's going to give them some money. The issue that we're dealing with now is that the plan that this company has come up with is, well, we'll fix it and it'll be all well in 5 years. And so we just need a little bond and the mine will be fine. However, that theory doesn't fit with what has happened. Uranium, radium, and arsenic have increased since April of 2017 or 2016. Something happened, and the contaminants in the mine pool are increasing, not decreasing. So their theory about you do an RO, they do an RO treatment, they take the brine, they put barium in it, put it back in the mine pool. It's hard for me to understand how putting the contaminants back in the water could ever really work. The theory is it settles to the bottom. But at any rate, so, and they're seeking Dreams approval for this transfer. And the issue is what kind of bond should they post? But Dreams is working really hard. You know, arsenic and uranium and radium are really bad contaminants. So we're working closely with Dreams, and hopefully we can do something that makes sense. On the good news, historic news front, the Blue River Decree that Denver Water has had negotiated in 1955. It's in legislation. Anyway, Blue River Decree was a huge issue in negotiating the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement. One of the big things that Denver Water really wanted. was certainty under the Blue River Decree, because that's about 25% of our water supply. And it had been filed in federal court and in state court. The federal court has had jurisdiction over certain things over the years. And at any rate, long story short, Judge Boyd finally signed the Blue River Decree last week. So we now have a fully negotiated Blue River Decree that resolves all the issues that we've had with the West Slope over decades. It's a major accomplishment. We hit a little bump in the road when the federal judge, Judge Krieger, decided that she didn't really want to have anything to do with state water decrees. Couldn't understand what this decree was doing in her court anyway. And so she kind of bumped it out, said, don't bother me anymore, which is good in the long run. It's the way it should be, but we couldn't figure out exactly how to paper that over because the idea was that both courts would approve. But we figured that out. And what this means, the Blue River Decree, resolution of Blue River Decree issues was a major trigger for benefits under the CRCA, including $4.5 million, which will be first quarter of next year, to 5 entities in Summit County, like most of the entities in Summit County. Municipal governments and some water. So it happens, so you wait for 5 years and then all of a sudden there it is. So now we're trying to go back over and say what is due, but there's water for all the entities in Summit County and some other benefits. So it's really a big deal. The other major trigger that might happen sometime soon is obtaining all the Moffett permits. And we got the 404 permit this past summer, which was major, and we expect our FERC license amendment decision, at least the decision that comes out for comment. We expect that any week now. So we're pretty much at the end of that process. Then there's a 30-day comment period, and then FERC issues its final decision. So we're making progress, and in fact, we filed a diligence application for Gross Reservoir in South Boulder Creek. And despite being in the South Platte Basin, there were no statements of opposition, practically unheard of. So we now have diligence on Gross Reservoir. So it's been an active time, and we are, in fact, making a lot of progress as we figure out how to manage water supplies going forward. A little hiccup on reuse, but maybe we'll get there too. So, and that completes my report.
Questions for Director Wells? Thank you for that report. Let's move to the Rio Grande River Basin. Director Dutton.
Regarding the roundtable, the Rio Grande Roundtable welcomed a couple new members this last month and also elected officers for the 2018 year. So Nathan Coombs, Emma Resor, and Cindy Medina will continue as the chair, vice chair, and secretary, respectively. The roundtable also approved 5 WSRF grants at the January meeting, and these include some pretty diverse projects across the whole basin. So it sounds like the southern end of the state's going to be bringing a whole pile of applications for the board meeting in March. This is my very colorful and very depressing hydrograph. So there's some hand-drawn notations in there. Director Hawkins, we can commiserate over our dismal snowpack. The dark blue line is 2018. You can see that it is below the red line that is 2002, which was the worst year on record for us. This graph is dated. It showed that we were 32% of average. So with the storms over the weekend, we are now 39% of average. So still nothing to be too excited about. Hopefully, I think our staff friends at the Division of Water Resources were trying to find a year that it was this bad and then turned around. So there's some optimism, but if that doesn't happen, the water entities in the valley have started to discuss our message and actions and prepare for what could turn into a very bad year. So already the groundwater management subdistrict number 1 is offering expanded fallowing programs, which will incentivize reduced groundwater pumping. Additionally, the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District is planning some conservation messaging. And so we had a long discussion at our last board meeting about if we should be trying to do programs and trying to get people to really think about their behaviors. And one of my board members very astutely noted that this graph is pretty telling. And because 2002 is a not so distant memory, our goal will be to get this everywhere that we can and really get people to see where we're at. And hopefully they will adjust their plans accordingly. We are also planning to partner with all of the towns and cities in the valley and really emphasize conservation more than ever this year. It's been mentioned a couple times that the well rules and regulations trial for Division 3 will begin next week. And so the draft rules will require well depletions be replaced through participation in groundwater management subdistricts or individual plans of augmentation, or without some sort of court-approved plan, then the wells will have to stop pumping. So this is a pretty historic event, and many of us are greatly looking forward to attending the trial and seeing history be made. Regarding the radar, Simpson, who's the manager for the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, Gigi Dennis, who is the Alamosa County administrator, and then our own Joe Busto attended a hearing in front of the Capitol Committee in December that I was told went very well. The feedback from the committee was really positive. And so our coalition is working on next steps for that. And we're hopeful. The grant request through the CDC in front of the, through CDOT was for $300,000, which would match CWCB funding. There are also several water districts and counties who are working together on language for an intergovernmental agreement to talk about the long-term funding and maintenance and operation of the unit. And then so far, the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, I keep stumbling on my own organization, so that's funny. Let's try it one more time. The San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, Rio Grande Water Conservation District, and Caneos Water Conservancy District have all pledged ongoing support, either monetarily or with staff. And Alamosa County is at the table to provide the location and internet access and power for the unit. So there's still a lot of momentum, and thanks to Joe for your continued support of that. Andrew, if you could go to the pictures. So while the weather has been pretty awful for those of us who love snow sports, it's been pretty great for construction. So I wanted to share some pictures of some projects, or a project that has been funded recently by this board. At the September meeting, the board approved a grant for the Colorado Rio Grande Restoration Foundation and a loan for the Centennial Ditch Company for the 5 Ditches project. And so the contractor broke ground on the 5 Ditches project, starting with the Centennial Ditch. This is a pretty cool drone shot looking downstream at the old diversion dam, it was pretty old, it was really inefficient, and it was very dangerous because this section of the river gets really low flows, but there's also the Centennial Ditch is a very senior ditch. And so the ditch superintendent would have to physically crawl out onto the dam and put boards in place, which I think in his youth was pretty fun, and now is just a terrifying annual event that he does not look forward to. So if you could go to the next slide. This is looking upstream at that pile of concrete and stuff that's not so great. Next slide. So this was the contractor with a big old jackhammer attachment, and he broke up all the concrete. And then next. And now they're putting in the new rocks, and so it'll be a grouted rock structure that has a low flow channel, but is designed to better check up the grade and requires no crawling out in the river. That one got super artistic. So yeah, this is just a super exciting project that will improve safety, reduce maintenance. It'll improve the surrounding riparian habitat, and it maintains a fish barrier to keep non-native pike downstream. So thanks to the board for funding great projects like this, because our folks locally really appreciate it. And that's my report.
Questions for Director Dutton? Thank you for that report. Let's move to Yampa White and Green River Basin. Director Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Starting off the new year, our snow water equivalent was about 60%. Recent snows, we've had 2 major events. I say major, I'm being generous, have improved that to about 70%. But this just takes us up, as it has in other basins, up to the 2002 level. So we're still following fairly closely on that curve. We're ever hopeful that the snow, that the pattern that established itself last fall will not be recreated, and that we will continue to have even little snows help. But I think, meanwhile, the prospects of a drought statewide will hopefully serve us to focus public attention on the implementation of the Colorado Water Plan. Of course, if we don't have the snow, there's not much we could plan for, but going into this year with good storage is a very important part of for our service to our communities. In roundtable news at our January meeting, Wilson Water presented modeling results for the Yampa and White Rivers. And we now believe that we have a reasonably reliable decision-making tool that can help us in implementing our basin plan and looking at our IPPs. The next phase of modeling later this year will incorporate elements of the SWASI as they're made available later in the year. One of the primary focuses of our roundtable has been to step up our public education and outreach. And so our PEPO committee is being very active and is scheduling a series of educational events in the coming months in Craig, Meeker, Rangeley, and Steamboat, and including workshops on water leasing, micro hydropower, which is interesting, and also, of course, Yampa and Colorado River issues. Among the CWCB funded projects in the Morgan Bottom above Hayden, the river work has been completed in the river to reconnect the Gibraltar ditch to the river while also providing a low water channel. That work has been completed, and this coming year we're hoping to begin work farther downstream along the Williams Ditch area there to improve the habitat there for the fish. I may be a little bit premature here, but I'd like to thank Directors Wattenberg and McLeod for their long service to this board and to the citizens of Colorado. You've been a paragon of public service, and you will continue to serve your water communities. And I hope you'll find other communities to serve at home as well, which I know you do. Both do. So thank you.
Calling us a paragon makes me nervous.
Yes. So you're welcome. And that concludes my report.
Questions for Director Gallagher? Thank you for that report. At this point in time, we are concluded with agenda item number 20. Before we move to 21, I would like to step back for just a second. I think it was announced yesterday, but agenda item number 19 is out. So now we can proceed with agenda item number 21. I believe Chris Sturm. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Chris Sturm, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 21, Colorado Watershed Restoration Program grant funding recommendations. I have on the screen part of the table that's included in your packet, table 1, for the applications that we'll be talking about. Also apologize for the hoarseness of my voice. Sometimes I look at my children and I see little petri dishes, and it reminds me of microbiology in college, and I have to figure out what unknown bacteria or virus they're bringing home. I figured this one out. The Colorado Watershed Restoration Program was approved in September of 2008 in Alamosa, Colorado. I'll never forget that day. It was approved for $250,000, a very modest amount, but a very new kind of program for the board at the time. This year we had to really step it up. The grant requests were over $5 million, and the total funding recommendation and amount awarded for the amounts of the applications under 100,000 exceeds 3.5 million. So we've grown considerably. I'd like to take a brief moment to thank Elizabeth Schmidt at our office. Had to bring somebody in a lot more organized than I to help run this program this year. She's been an incredible help in keeping us organized and following up with any questions that the review committee has with applicants and contacting them about recommendations and awards. So I can't thank her enough, and she's done a wonderful job. The review committee reviewed 38 different applications. There's 16 in front of you today. Those represent the ones that are over 100,000. The applications were reviewed by as many as 7 people to the extent that they were stream management plans, and between 3 and 5 people for the other types of grant applications. We try to keep this review as objective as possible. I do find different staff every year to review these applications. Objectivity is incredibly important to me. I'm in the trenches with most of these projects, so I know them very well, and bringing other folks in helps with the scoring immensely. So thank you very much to everyone that participated in the review of these applications. We also do have some of the applicants in the audience today. When we review the applications, we look at basic applicant criteria. Is this stakeholder-driven collaborative? Do we see a commitment here to restoring the ecological processes that connect land and water while protecting life and property? Those are 2 of the big basic applicant criteria. If they make it through that, then we look at the elements of the application that are scored. Includes the organization's qualifications, who are their stakeholders, what kind of match do they have. When we ask about their stakeholders, we're not interested in just a litany of organizations listed in the application, but we're also interested in how they're going to participate. What do they bring to the project? We also look at their organizational capacity. What history of achievements do they have in their watershed and basin? What staff will they bring to the effort that we're looking at? And also their budget and timeline. I've gotten better at budgets and timelines over the years, and I find that a lot of folks try to do things on too ambitious of a time scale. So we do look at whether or not they can achieve it in the time that they've allocated. Finally, we score it for effectiveness. We're looking at what types of information they're using to implement the project or planning effort, the multi-objectivity. This is a huge part of the program. What type of objectives are they trying to fulfill through this project? And then finally, the monitoring. How are they going to monitor success, whether it be a planning effort or a project effort? So once we have all of those scored, we average them, we look at the scores, and then we take other things into consideration. Are we respecting the geography of the state? We want to have applications funded in all parts of the state, all our major basins. Unfortunately, we didn't receive applications from all the basins this year, but we do have funding recommendations for each basin that did submit applications. Usually what we see with the average scores, and we did see it this year, is an obvious break. That's usually anywhere from 6 to 10 points for that average score. And that's where we start talking about partially funding or no funding because there's such a big gap in the average scores. Things that we do look at for those lower scoring applications, though, are usually in the realm of flood hazard mitigation. Are their lives and properties at risk? And should we take a closer look at this application and work with them to improve upon it, but still fund it because of that need? So I've got the, and we'll scroll through these. I think maybe the best way to start is to talk about our partially funded recommendations and our no funding recommendations. You'll see the lion's share of the award in front of you is from the South Platte Basin. They submitted a lot of applications, but also the 2 that are not recommended for funding are from the South Platte as well. The Conservation Legacy, which is in the Southwest Basin, submitted an application for 281,000. Just over that, we recommended 200,000. We have a long history with this group. This is a tamarisk removal project on the Dolores River. It's kind of like guerrilla removal. These guys are going into very remote places and very difficult places to get to remove the tamarisk. 10 years ago when I found out about it, I wanted to go in there with them, but I think differently about that now. We've invested a lot of time and money with these guys over the years, and they're kind of evolving. They're achieving their objectives. And what we saw this year was the majority of the request was for secondary weed treatment. And we don't typically fund secondary weed treatment as a standalone project through this program. There are elements of tamarisk removal as well. There was, I think, over 70,000 of the budget was for tamarisk removal. So the recommendation was to cut back on some of that secondary weed treatment in our ward. I contacted the grantee. I said, do you guys still have a viable project here? They're more than happy with the amount that we recommended and said they would be able to achieve success with that recommendation. The second partial recommendation is for the Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative. There are actually 3 applications into one. I've reached out to the contact on this application. I recommended that moving forward, we have 3 separate applications. The three applications are match funding for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program to recover from the Hayden Pass fire. I am intimately familiar with the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. Kevin and I are implementing a $60 million plus program with the NRCS for flood recovery in that right now. And they were asking, this is a cost share program with the NRCS where the NRCS provides 75% and the locals provide 25%. The application was asking for 25% of the match. What we've been doing in flood recovery at the state level in Larimer, Weld, El Paso, and Boulder counties is providing 12.5% of that match. We thought it prudent to be consistent with how we're approaching that program in flood recovery, and so the recommendation there is 12.5%. We recommended full funding for a $90,000 request for the Purgatory River Watershed Partnership. This is to build some capacity to this group, help them hire staff, work towards monitoring some of the projects that they've implemented to improve their fishery in Trinidad and upstream, and also to lay the basis of a stream management plan to look at flow releases out of the reservoir to maintain winter flows for trout habitat. That element of the application fit very well with this program and full funding for it. The last piece was a selenium science plan. This piece of the application, and I'll take a step back here. Often when I'm talking to applicants that don't get funding, I start by saying our recommendation of no funding does not reflect on the merit of your project. It just reflects on how well it scores against the criteria of this program. And that's what we're looking at here with the selenium science plan. I know this is a high priority. The Watershed Restoration Program in the past has not funded standalone water quality studies and planning efforts. It has done it as part of a greater effort for watershed planning, where water quality impairments are part of it. And this fits into the whole multi-objectivity of the program. And for that reason, coupled with the fact that this was one of our lower scoring applications, we did not recommend funding for that part of the application. I'll scroll down to the no funding recommendation. The Town of Lyons, again, they submitted an application that has merit but did not score well against the criteria of this program. In fact, did not meet the basic applicant criteria. That's the Lyons is working alone to restore their McConnell ponds. They're not working with a stakeholder group. I discussed this with them last week. Staff was incredibly understanding at Lions, and they understood that this was not the best fit with the watershed restoration program. And then finally, the St. Vrain Creek Coalition, one of the lower scoring applications. This was very difficult to come forward with a zero funding recommendation. We have recommendations to fund several of our flood recovery coalitions. We can't just build all these projects in flood recovery and walk away from them. There is going to be a need to adaptively manage them and monitor them. The NRCS is requiring 3 years of O&M on these projects. That said, this application did not score very well. And what I have recommended to my boss, Kevin Hauk, and to our Deputy Director, Lauren Riss, is that we still have an obligation towards adaptively managing and monitoring the projects that the St. Vrain Creek Coalition is implementing. There's 3 of them. The agreement to do this with the NRCS is between the NRCS and the CWCB. So we're paying for it one way or another. In some instances in this recommendation with the Big Thompson Coalition and the Left Hand Watershed Oversight Group, our recommendation is to fund their applications for this effort. In this case, we're not recommending that we fund this application, but we're cognizant of the fact that if adaptive management is needed, we will be on the hook to pay for it. And we do have a plan to work with the coalition to do that as needed. And we also have already developed a plan to monitor their projects and many other projects that we've implemented through flood recovery. So with that, I think I will open it up to any questions about the other funding recommendations. And we do have some representatives of the applications in the audience as well.
Questions for Chris at this time? Director Hawkins.
It seems like a board meeting of disclosures for me, so I'll start with the fact that the Nature Conservancy is a partner in the Dolores River Restoration Partnership. I wanted to thank you, Chris, for spending quite a bit of time on the phone with me, walking me through both the applications in front of us and the ones under the $100,000 mark. And I will finish by saying that it's actually really fun to go out on the ground with Conservation Legacy. These are young men and women that are being trained up with skills, and so I will think about that as a board field trip.
Other questions for Director Yon?
I just want to thank you for your diligence and at looking at all these projects. I know some of these can be kind of hard, especially when you have to go back and suggest that they not get any funding. So I just want to thank you for looking at them closely and bringing the best projects to us. So thanks, Chris.
Welcome, Director Yon. I'll add quickly that the review of these 38 applications represents 40 hours of my time. So when you think about the entire review committee is a significant investment of staff time in reviewing these applications.
Thank you, Chris. Director Gallagher.
Yes, Chris, thank you so much. I just want to recognize that you really created this out of nothing, out of the legacy of the 2013 floods, in terms of creating the concept of watershed restoration. You're still in that process of putting this together, but you've put the sideboards on it, you've developed criteria, and it's a real testimony to you and your staff and the stakeholders and applicants for doing this hard work of putting together something that's worthwhile the investment of public money. So I want to commend you for that.
Thank you, Director Gallagher.
All right, 2 questions to this. First one is, does the board have any questions of the applicants? Without that, My next question is to the applicants. We would love to hear from you. It's not mandatory, but if you would like to address the board, we will certainly take the time to listen. So I do have somewhat of a list here, but I'm failing to, if I miss someone, please forgive me at this point in time. And we can start with that. So yeah, go ahead, Chris, if you would like to make your introductions, and we can go from there. Is that agreeable with everybody?
Okay, I'm not sure of who all showed up to represent the applicants.
Well,
here,
that's where I was
but
having a little
Yeah,
difficulty.
I do see Sean Cronin out there to represent the St. Vrain Left-Hand Stream Management Plan that's recommended for funding. And I think Jesse Olson's out there with the Left-Hand Watershed Oversight Group. Who else? Lori Rink with the Middle Colorado Stream Management Plan. Oh, and Larry Small with the Fountain Creek implementation project. and Ken Newbecker.
And me.
Oh, and Carol Carries with the Arkansas Collaborative. Sorry, Carol. Okay,
Like
so
I
the
say,
City and
we
County of Denver project has representatives as well.
very much would like to hear from each and every one of you, but don't feel that that is mandatory. So we can start this process however you would like to, Chris. Well, thank you, ma'am. If you would please introduce yourself.
So my name is Carol Icarius, and I am the CEO of Coalitions and Collaboratives, which is a new group that grew out of the Coalition for the Upper South Platte, which is a name that's been around for a lot longer, and people tend to recognize that more. But in 2014, CUSP was being asked to help in other areas where there were fires and floods. Unfortunately, due to Hayman and Buffalo Creek and other fires, we had obtained a great deal of experience in that area. So we formed COCO to do that. One of the first projects COCO undertook was helping to form the Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative. That process came out of the Basin Implementation Plan planning process. So it came out of the roundtable, and RWIC serves as a watershed collaborative of the entire Ark Basin Roundtable. It is now actually forming into a legal nonprofit, so I'm hoping before the end of the year, RWIC would be applying for its grants itself next year, but in the meantime, we are acting as its fiscal host. We did get one of the partial fundings. Chris called and explained it. I totally understand, and his logic made total sense to me. A large part of it was the Hayden Pass fire. But when he said, you know, we did the 12.5% on all the other fires and floods, we're going to stick to that. I said, fair enough. And then on the Selenium plan, he had some suggestions for other programs at CWCB that may be a better fit for funding that. In the long term, the water quality in the lower Arkansas, particularly with selenium, but also with uranium and nutrients, is a very major issue down there. It affects our relationship with Kansas. It affects the farmers. It affects the local communities and their drinking water quality. So there is a collaborative working around that. It includes EPA, state health, someone from here. I think now Carly is going to be our key person. Brent had been. So we'll keep working on these projects, and we'll keep looking for other ways to fund that science plan. Any questions?
Questions? Director Goebel.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's not really a question, but thanks, Carol, for making the trip up here. Carol does really good work, and we appreciate having her help in the Arkansas. And also, thanks for being understanding. And I know Chris Sturman and the staff put a lot of work into this, obviously, and to try to find the best projects. And also, thanks to Chris for kind of redirecting certain projects to maybe better sources. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Carol, for being here today. Anyone else?
Morning. I'm
Morning.
Larry Small, Executive Director of the Fountain Creek Watershed Flood Control and Greenway District. We're a Title 32 special district created by the legislature in 2009, signed into law by Governor Ritter on April 30th, 2009. So we're finishing up our 8th year. We've made a lot of progress in El Paso and Pueblo counties, which is the area of the district, and particularly along Fountain Creek from Colorado Springs to Pueblo. We completed a WARS assessment of that corridor in March of this year and identified 215 issues in the corridor that were seriously eroding and creating large sediment loads into the creek. This project takes 4 of those issues and combines them into a single project in Pueblo to begin the restoration work based on that WARS grant that you provided us. So we appreciate very much the support we have received from CWCB over the years that we've been in business. Our accomplishments are largely attributed to the support that we've received from you. We appreciate very much the staff support that we have been given in the execution of our project in terms of guidance, technical advice, support, just a tremendous group of people to work with, very helpful to small organizations like ours. So again, thank you. And we're very proud to be working with such a wonderful staff to accomplish the stream restoration activities in our district. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Questions for Larry? Thank you for being here and thank you for your comments. We do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Morning.
Morning. My name's Ken Newbecker. I work with American Rivers, and first I want to apologize for sneaking up on Chris. I just got here from Glenwood Springs this morning, and I want to thank the board and Chris for his work on this, the Crystal project that we're doing with the town of Carbondale. I've partnered with the Roaring Fork Conservancy and the Aspen Valley Land Trust to work on this, and it's the beginning, baby step beginning of implementation of the existing Crystal River Stream Management Plan. And what we're hoping is to use this as a pilot project on the Weaver Ditch to begin the improving the efficiency and function of all of the ditches that are in the town of Carbondale. It's like many older West Slope towns, has an extensive ditch system running through the town. And it's also a way that we can start showing all of the irrigators, not just the town, but the ranchers and the others upstream, that you can start doing these things, improving the efficiencies and operations of your ditches and not get struck by lightning. So hopefully this will start that ball rolling and maybe start getting the momentum going for implementation of other elements of the plan. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Questions for Ken? Again, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your comments. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Lori Rink. I'm the Executive Director of the Middle Colorado Watershed Council. And I want to thank the board and Chris and other staff for considering our proposal for an integrated water management plan on the Middle Colorado. As we were entering into the pre-project outreach phase of our work, working with engaging our partners in this project, what we have been successful in, and I'm very happy to report that the agricultural community has, we've gotten their attention in our basin. And just at yesterday's Colorado Basin Roundtable meeting, there was consideration of a proposal for 3 different conservation districts, which represent agricultural producers in our basin, to come forward and to pursue a parallel study. So while we're going to be focusing on the main stem of the Colorado River, 75 miles and doing a stream management plan there. Looking at the non-consumptive use needs, we have the agricultural community stepping up to look very specifically at some of the needs for their folks. And so we have an agreement to be working together and to pull this all into one plan. And so that's very encouraging. This has been a very high priority kind of initiative from the perspective of our Basin Roundtable, and that's memorialized in our Basin Implementation Plan. So we're really encouraged that with what we've envisioned for the non-consumptive use work through the Watershed Restoration Program, that this is blossoming into a much larger, more integrated project. So thank you very much.
Questions for Lori? Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
Josh Tennyson and Barbara Changtua, and we are here representing the Cherry Creek Restoration Project. I want to make a couple of brief points, but first I want to thank the board for its consideration and all the efforts that you do across the state. As a citizen, immensely thankful for all of the work that you do. With this project, can't stress collaboration enough. We're working on a mile of stream that is in part in Arapahoe County and in part in the city and county of Denver. So as far as partnership goes, we have urban drainage, the Southeast Metro Stormwater Authority, Arapahoe County, city and county of Denver, and Denver Water, among others, all really coming together to make this happen. And it's a multifaceted project. And one of the reasons that Arapahoe County Open Space is involved is in part because of the restoration work that's going on, but also because of the extensive recreation amenities that we're able to provide our citizens. And I want to turn it over to Barbara a little bit to talk about some of the technical things that we'll be working on over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to speak on the project. I think Josh thanked the board, so I'd maybe like to take a moment just to thank Chris and his team. I know it was a difficult task to look through.
Interrupt you for just a second. If you could maybe state your last name, if
Oh,
you would,
sure.
please.
Barbara Changtua.
Thank you. That's just for our record. So.
Just want to thank Chris and his team. I know that looking through all of the proposals, it took time and effort, and I do appreciate the effort that his team spent in reviewing the proposal. Chris spoke to how this program started in 2008 with about $200,000. This project started with our entire stakeholder team, which includes the City of County of Denver, both Public Works and the Open Space Group, Arapahoe County Public Works and Open Space, Denver Water, CDOT, the Southeast Metro Stormwater Authority, with $250,000 in 2011. It's a really expensive project because of how contaminated the soil is. And with $250,000, we've grown it to a project today. With the support of, I think, CWCB, we'll be able to make this project happen. We plan to go to construction in 2019 to 2020. What this will do is it'll restore a reach of Cherry Creek that has never been touched. This is a very original piece of Cherry Creek. It sits within land that is owned by the City and County of Denver Water Department. It's very degraded. There is no ecologic stability along this reach. What we plan to do is to restore the stability of the stream, bring back in water that will support aquatic life. We're going to spend a lot of dollars actually revegetating the project so that we actually have a riparian corridor. And that will become then the foundation for recreation and water quality enhancement. The contribution of the CWCB will make a difference in this quarter, not only for aquatic terrestrial life, but also the recreational components used by the neighborhood and the community. So we just really want to say from the entire stakeholder team, thank you.
Thank you. Questions of the board from Josh and Barbara? Again, thank you for being here. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Yon.
I just wanted to thank you for being here, and Josh and Barbara. And the thing that impressed me about this project is, we get to be part of it as a CWCB, but we're only contributing 500,000 to over $15 million project. So it's great that you brought so many partners together and have such an incredible amount of funding from other sources. So it's just a good thing to see. I know you probably have more opportunity in the Denver metro area than some other places in Colorado, but you've pulled it together and you've done what looks like to be a really good job. So thanks for bringing this to us.
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here today. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Good morning. Jesse Olson. I'm the Executive Director of Left Hand Watershed Oversight Group. So I just wanted to thank you and Chris and Kevin and your staff just for allowing us the opportunity to complete this very important project. So we recently completed 10 restoration projects on private land in our watershed this past year through the EWP program funding as well as funding from CWCB. And this project allows us really to protect the investment that you've already made into our community and make sure that those benefits of these projects continue long term. And so we're really excited to be able to continue that investment and or continue protecting that investment. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Jesse? I don't believe so, but thank you for being here. We really do appreciate your input. So. Good morning.
Good morning. Sean Cronin, St. Brendan Left Hand Water Conservancy District. I wasn't planning on saying anything, but now it would seem really foolish if I didn't get up here. So maybe my 2018 resolution is brevity. Thank you for considering this project. In my mind, this is really the essence of what Colorado's water plan really considered is how do we manage the water supplies to meet multiple uses. And so for us as a conservancy district and the uniqueness of St. Vrain and what that brings to our local community and what it means to the South Platte Basin, we thought it was really a great opportunity to seek out some funding and really engage in more in-depth conversations on some of the elements of Colorado's water plan, as well as plan better for our future. So we really appreciate you giving us this opportunity to do a deeper dive in the basin and consume my life for the next couple years. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Questions for Sean? Thanks for the Director Yon.
Can't let him go away. No, thanks for bringing this project, Sean, and you did a really good job putting it together. And also thanks to Jesse and you for calling me and explaining all these to me. Took the time to do that, so I appreciate that a lot.
Welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Despite you being an avid New England Patriots fan.
I'm glad you put that on the record, John.
That's right. The merits of the project exceed that little hiccup.
Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. All right, Chris, without hopefully not cutting anybody off, we will move to staff recommendation.
Okay, before I read the staff recommendation, I will point out to the board that the funding approvals for the applications less than 100,000 are in the director's report, and I will be around through lunch today. If you have any questions about those, I can answer those. But for this board agenda item, staff recommends that the board approve a non-reimbursable expenditure up to $2,640,013 from the Colorado Watershed Restoration Program for the purpose of providing match funding to the projects identified in Table 1.
Director Dutton.
Been ready. I move staff recommendation.
Motion by Director Dutton. Second by Director Gallagher to move staff recommendation, agenda item number 21. Further, Director Wells.
Even though Denver Water is contributing degraded land to the Cherry Creek Restoration Project, we would be an indirect beneficiary of the grant. So could the record please reflect that I'm going to recuse myself from the portion of the vote that deals with Colorado, the Cherry Creek Restoration Project.
That is duly noted if the official record would reflect that. Further discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now that the motion has carried, I was advised to ask you guys, and I'm not looking for an answer now, but maybe we could discuss it over lunch, whether it would be your preference moving forward to do these in block as we have today, or to address them individually. So just something for the board to think about, and we welcome any feedback on that.
By that, with you that at a later date. Thanks, Chris. Let's move to agenda item number 22.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Kevin Hauk, CWCB staff. I'm here to present agenda item 22, which is a floodplain designation for Harvard Gulch and Dry Gulch within the city and county of Denver and the city of Englewood. As most of you know, the majority of floodplain designations that are presented to you for action show up on your agenda as part of the consent agenda. Generally, they're not controversial, they don't create a lot of problems, and it's a fairly easy decision for you to make moving forward. Anytime there's any hint or sign of controversy, I usually make the decision to bring it to you on the regular agenda rather than the consent agenda. And just based on some conversations I had with the city of Englewood, I thought that would be the wise thing to do with this one. So if any of you recall from last March, a similar item was brought forward to you in regards to the town of Estes Park. This is going to follow that same line of thinking, and in fact, the presentation is largely the same, so it should look pretty familiar to most of you who were on the board at that time and attended that presentation. So this is going to be an action item, and I will be asking at the end of the item for you to consider designation of this study. I'm not going to get into too much of the technical details of it, as I don't think the technical merits of the study, at least to my understanding, are being challenged at this time. So let me just tell you a little bit about the study itself. On this first slide, you'll see what the floodplain designations themselves look like. You'll see this is Harvard Gulch running through the city and county of Denver right there, outfalling on the South Platte River. And then coming in down below is Dry Gulch running through Denver as well as the city of Englewood. And when I talk to the city and county of Denver floodplain administrator, he tells me that Harvard Gulch is actually probably their most difficult watershed to regulate from a floodplain management standpoint. And I don't know which. Okay. I don't believe there's any concern expressed by the city and county of Denver or any of its citizens. I think most of the discussions I've had are in regards to Dry Gulch, which is down in that part of the watershed. So I just want to remind everybody on the board, floodplain maps portray risk. We're not out to make life difficult for anybody. We're also not out to give artificially good news. We are just simply trying to demonstrate the risk that exists out in the world in various watersheds, and this one is no exception. Just a reminder of the statutory authorities and obligations you as the board have. These are basically the authorities that give us the authority to set the floodplain rules and regulations that you passed 7 years ago, almost 8. And one of the responsibilities the board has is to designate and approve floodplain studies to make sure that they are of good technical merit that can be brought forward to portray flood risk and also are consistent with our state floodplain rules and regulations. Key to remember is your designations should be based on the technical merits of the study and not any political or economic influences. We're certainly happy to hear any concerns that are expressed by that, but the designation itself really is a technical process. As far as the study that was presented for designation here, this is the flood hazard area delineation for Harvard Gulch and Dry Gulch prepared by Matrix Design Group. And the primary project manager for this project was the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, with it being co-sponsored by the City and County of Denver and the City of Englewood. And before I continue, I would like to recognize in the audience, we have Shay Thomas from the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, and then also Paul Weller from the City of Englewood. So if you have any questions of them, they will be available as well. Again, without boring you with the details, I want you to know that after doing a thorough review of the study prior to presenting it to you for designation, the study was all of these things that you see on the slide here. Scientific, transparent, thorough, consistent with studies that are done in other watersheds throughout the Denver metropolitan area. Urban Drainage and Flood Control District has a very long-standing history of preparing these studies with their consultants, and they do a very good job. They're a great technical partner, and this study is no exception. Prepared by accomplished professionals, extensively reviewed, and it's consistent with our rules and regulations. And at that point, I would like to stop and see if the board members have any questions, either for me or for any of the co-sponsors of the project out in the audience.
We have questions for Kevin or Kay or Paul at this point in time? I'm not seeing any. Please.
Are you prepared for a staff recommendation then?
Yes, and a quick update. I'm assuming you would like this in two separate motions.
There's two elements to the staff recommendation, but usually I think we can handle it in one motion.
All right, we will be directed to put this all into one motion then.
Okay. And I do want to note that I'm going to make a couple of slight modifications to what is printed in your board memo. It's actually Harvard Gulch, not Harvard Creek. So as I read the staff recommendation, I'm going to reflect that accordingly. Staff recommends that the board designate and approve the 100-year and 500-year detailed floodplain and floodway information contained in said report for Harvard Gulch split flow, and Dry Gulch within the City and County of Denver and the City of Englewood, and authorize staff to prepare a floodplain resolution to be signed by the director and transmitted to Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, the City and County of Denver, the City of Englewood, and FEMA. This action is recommended in order to meet statutory requirements. Mr. Chair, that is the staff recommendation. I do want to make one note really quick. The reason I brought this to you on the agenda item is I wasn't sure if anybody was going to show up in the audience wanting to comment on this from the public. So I don't know if anybody is here, so I might just want to check on that before you vote.
Check on that. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak at the board at this point in time? I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Recommendation before us. Director Gallagher.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move staff recommendation.
Motion by Director Gallagher. Second by Director Goebel to move staff recommendation, agenda item number 22, subsections 1 and 2. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, at this time, we are scheduled for a break. We're a little bit early. Let's take a 15-minute break. How about back here at 10:45? Thank you. From our brief recess, ready for agenda item number 23.
Good to go? Okay.
Good to go. Please proceed.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, I am Megan Holcomb, CWCB staff, and I'll be presenting agenda items 23A, B, and C, which are grant requests from Colorado and Rio Grande basins. The first item is 23A, which is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the Colorado Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the Eagle County Conservation District for the project titled Coag Met Station Number 2. The purpose of this application is to help the Conservation District fund a Colorado Agricultural Meteorological Station, which is a mouthful, on land centrally located in Eagle County for the benefit of the entire community. Eagle County plans to purchase a second unit in March 2018 from the CSU Extension Office in Fort Collins, as the machines are in high demand and on back order until March. A second station will vastly expand the regional network of data and how Eagle County can report for upcoming growing seasons and irrigation scheduling recommendations. There are currently 75 existing stations in the state of Colorado, most of which have continued support from local conservation districts. A written contract between the landowner and the ideal location and the conservation district has already been approved to create a lease for the use of this property, which allows for the installation and maintenance of the unit. Eagle County will also host a workshop to educate the community on how to access and use the data, which will be readily available to landowners through an online portal for improving irrigation practices. Data gathered from the second device will be used to make better water use and efficiency decisions throughout the Eagle County Conservation District's community, including water use for crop farming, private gardens, lawns, irrigation control, and weed management. The applicant is providing a cash match of $10,000, which is exactly 50% of the project costs. The applicant requests $10,000 from the Colorado Basin account, and staff recommends approval. The total project costs then come to $20,000, which includes the delivery and installation fees. No additional needs or issues have been identified, and I will be the program manager for this project. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Questions for Megan at this time? Is our applicant in the...
They are not here today. No.
We have, I believe, staff recommendation. Director Wells, motion by Director Wells to move staff recommendation, agenda item 23A. Second by Director Yon. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
On to agenda item 23B, which is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the Rio Grande Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation and Education Initiative for the project titled Roundtable Media and Communications Outreach Project. This project continues the communications and media efforts of the Rio Grande Roundtable's Public Outreach and Public Education Committee. Funds will be used for administrative support for a 3-year cycle of interrelated communication and media strategies on behalf of the Roundtable to be undertaken by a variety of partners. These outreach strategies include a total of 6 video vignettes, each of which will be cost shared with other partners on topics that are related to the many different uses of water in the valley. This includes reservoirs, municipal use, recreation, radar and snow forecasting, industrial, agriculture, and public-private partnerships. The strategies were chosen and vetted by the Education Committee and reflect the needs of the Roundtable for engaging and informative interaction with the community. The first year's videos are already decided with the Conejos Water Conservancy District covering the radar snow forecast project and a group of local organizations focusing on water and recreation. The other video topics remain open to allow for discussion and ideas within the Rio Grande Roundtable, but other organizations have expressed interest, such as the Colorado Potato Administrative Committee and industrial and municipal water use organizations. In addition to these video vignettes, a website designer will build the additional website pages needed for an interactive map that's going to highlight projects past, present, and projected for the Roundtable, which has funded these projects, as well as an FAQ section, more contact information, and linking to several partner websites that are relevant to state and local projects. Lastly, the funds will also support a quarterly community newsletter with updated activities, projects, and information about roundtable meetings, and in addition, those local and state projects. The purpose of these strategies is to provide high-quality materials that will promote roundtable projects, partners, and relevant issues. The applicant is providing $46,500 cash match, which is 42% of the total project costs and otherwise meet all matching requirements. The applicant requests $64,480,000 from the Rio Grande Basin account, and staff recommends approval. If approved, I will be the CWCB project manager, and the applicant, Bethany Howell, is the executive director of the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation and Education Initiative and is here today. We are both available to take questions if there are any.
Questions for Megan at this point in time? And I hopefully I heard you right. Is it Becky?
Bethany. You want to say something?
Morning. You can certainly address the board if you would like.
Morning. My name is Bethany Howell, and I have been the executive director of the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation Education Initiative. It is a mouthful for the past about 16 months. And so we had worked with our education committee as part of our roundtable to come up with a comprehensive media plan that covers a lot of the cutting edge issues that we're seeing come out of the valley that we feel like need to be addressed and need to have our story behind it and our messaging with the roundtable with many different people who are now coming into the valley as tourists and new employees and residents, and just to really to connect them with what we're doing with water in the valley specifically, but also across the state of Colorado. So it's nice to meet you. Thank you.
Questions for Bethany? I don't believe so. Thank you for being here today. Director Dutton.
I would just like to disclose that I am a unpaid volunteer board member on the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation and Education Initiative. So even though I will not personally benefit from this, I did want to disclose that. But with that, I would make a motion that we approve staff recommendation for this grant.
Andrew, if you would let the record reflect that. Motion by Director Dutton. Actually, second by Director Hawkins. Sorry, Director Gallagher. Really close. Further discussion? Call for the vote on agenda item 23B. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Great. Item 23C is an action item, and I'll have to note that there's a change in staff recommendation from what is reflected on your water activity summary sheet. Item 23C is a grant request conditionally recommended by staff in the Colorado Basin Roundtable for conditional approval. The applicant and grantee is the Highland Meadow Estates at Castle Peak Ranch Homeowners Association, Incorporated, for the project titled Oilson Ditch Pipeline Project. The objective of this project is to improve water efficiency within the Oilson Ditch delivery system. The primary concern with the associated ditch is the 1.1 CFS water loss throughout the open channel. The community has been aware of the problem since 2013, and a streamflow study in July of 2013 identified specific areas of significant loss. A buried pipeline will be installed to convey water from the source of Noeca Reservoir in the alignment of the ditch to the confluence with the Castle Creek Ditch, which is about 7,000 feet. The project estimates approximately 70 acre-feet per year in efficiency savings to help ensure dependable basin administration and improve the delivery infrastructure and efficiency for better hay crop yield. The Highland Meadow Estates at Castle Peak Ranch is a rural subdivision located in Eagle County. There are 24 water owners that will directly benefit from this project. There are an additional 17 owners on Castle Ditches 1 and 2 that will benefit indirectly. The NRCS is providing a cash match of $109,000, leaving $116,000 of the total project funds unidentified at this time. The applicant requests $25,000 from the Colorado Basin Roundtable. The total project cost is identified as $250,000, which please note that the applicant has then only identified about 54% of funding sources so far. The reason I am changing this to conditional approval are for the following two items. One was to ensure that the project can source sufficient funding before we go into contracting, and also to ensure the project scope is expanded and fully complete before we go into contracting. So the project scope that was in your packet, board packet, was a little light, and I was trying to work with the applicant to ensure before we came to the board meeting that was fleshed out fully. We definitely still have some work to do with that. So on that note, staff recommends conditional approval pending those two items.
Is the applicant here today?
The applicant is not here. Yes.
Questions for Megan at this point in time? Director George.
I don't have a question, but I'm ready to make a motion if you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
I move we adopt staff recommendation for conditional approval as stated by Megan.
Motion by Director George, second by Director Wells to move staff recommendation 23C. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
At this point in time, we do have a slight agenda change. We're proposing to change 25 ahead of 24. One of the applicants is having some travel difficulties. Hopefully they will be here after we get done with agenda item number 25. Please proceed, Craig, with 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an informational item. It's agenda item number 25A. It's an update on a previously approved ATM project that was carried out by Larimer County. They're very, very close to completion. And I'd like to introduce Alex Castino, land agent with Larimer County, and Todd Doherty with Western Water Partnerships. They will provide an update for you.
Welcome.
Craig, and we brought him a just a little recognition of the work he did to help us navigate the CWCB as total rookies to the water world even. And so thank you so much, Craig, for your help.
Great. It's been great working with you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And I should say John Stope was able to join us for our celebration in Fort Collins, and so he accepted one for the CWCB as well. So just a little update. Sure.
If you could introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry.
For the record, please.
I'm Alex Castino with Larimer County, and I was the project manager on behalf of the county. And Todd Doherty was the project manager for the team we hired with the money you so graciously provided us. So just to provide a little bit of background, how did an open space program get into this? Basically, in our 25-year history of conserving over 36,000 acres in Larimer County, less than 1,000 of those have been in irrigated agriculture, even though about 30% of the county is actually farm and ranch land. So we set out to get some public feedback about conservation priorities that they'd like us to pursue. And overwhelmingly, we heard that irrigated farming was something the citizens wanted us to figure out how to conserve. And so just some context on the farm here, the little red square there, you can see generally Longs Peak is up here, Boulder is down here, Longmont, Loveland. Here's kind of a corridor of agricultural production that is actually slated for development. And you can see Berthoud here, which is a strongly growing community. So from our perspective, the conservation values that were important to conserve were not only the irrigated farming, but also the historic features on the farm, the habitat along the Little Thompson River, as well as the many other lifestyle and quality of life features that are provided. Open space, scenic views to the Front Range mountain backdrop, etc. But as you can also see, $8.5 million is a big asking price, particularly for a program that brings in about $6 million per year. And that covers staff and all of our projects and maintenance. So we needed to be a little bit creative. We looked at what some other entities had done, and basically the wealthier entities had conserved all of the water with the farm. That wasn't really an option for us. The land trusts and so forth, when they conserve irrigated farming, approach a project like this by separating the native, more affordable water, keeping that with the farm, and the CBT would be sold off. We were hoping to find a compromise between those two, and maybe that it could accomplish both. So just, I don't need to tell you guys about buy and dry, but this is just some information about how it impacts our county. We're losing 4,500 acres per year, which in the South Platte Basin, with our projections, we could lose up to half of our farming. So these were our goals when we pursued the project. First, to conserve a viable irrigated farm in perpetuity, seek that strong financial partnership to make us be able to afford this project, and potentially provide a new tool or model for catalyzing more of these ATMs. So first, we applied for the CWCB grant, and you all were so gracious to award us $178,000 and change to hire a team of experts, which I'll introduce on the next slide. Then we went down the road of pursuing the project and figured out that Northern Water wanted to, hadn't ever had one of these before on CBT. And so they wanted to develop some rules about how that could happen. The team also was pivotal in doing that. Then we reached out to partners. We met overall with 25 different entities throughout Northern Colorado, and we're in active negotiations with at least 11. So here's the project team we hired: Todd Doherty, as I mentioned, Dan Brown with Fisher Brown, Bartlett and Gunn, Matt Lindberg, and Isabel Loretier with Brown and Caldwell, Ben Norman and Brad Walker. We're the economists and agronomists, and we also consulted with our advisory boards, CWCB, and the local ditches, and the farm lessee, which was invaluable. So we had to develop a portfolio of water where we could, well, we set out originally to put all of the water in an ATM, and we realized there was a big demand for purchasing CBT outright if possible. And so we needed to figure out what that balance could be. How much could we sell and how much could we put in the ATM to meet our budgetary constraints and also attract a partner? And so our water team, our water experts, helped us develop a plan where the farm could be viable for the foreseeable future, not in the ideal conditions only, but in the worst possible scenarios we could imagine. And so they did this with the water supply, balancing the native water and the CBT, and also running the farm depending on which cropping patterns were appropriate for the hydrologic conditions and the farm. So we consulted the agronomist and the farmer, and the economists ran the numbers. And even in a decade with 5 very dry and 5 dry years, the farm was profitable. And in fact, the farm is more profitable with the ATM, even in an average decade, in all decades we ran, than it is without an ATM, because in some years, let's face it, it's more profitable to farm the water than it is to farm the ground. So this is the meat of the ATM, which is probably what you're hoping to hear about. The financial viability piece, we sold 115 units at the purchase price. And I should say CWCB in 2017 awarded us $51,750 to make all of this possible. This wouldn't have closed without you guys. And so we closed on the ATM on 80 units that will be shared 3 out of every 10 years. And they paid us 40% of the market value upfront, and they'll also pay a dry year payment anytime the ATM is utilized. The farming side, they gave us notice. Of course, we wanted the earliest possible notice for the farmer. They wanted the latest possible notice so they know if they actually need the water. So we compromised on that. They'll give us notice by January 31st if they need it, and they can give us late notice with reimbursement of all of the farmers' expenses up until June 1st. They can't pull 15 units this year and 20 next year. It has to be a full exercise or nothing. They can't release the units, and we have the dry year payment, which hopefully makes them only pull it when they need it. And the 115 units we sold outright, we reserved a first right of refusal to lease back in years that they don't need it. So before the ATM, this was our, I guess, total for how much we spent on the farm, $8.3 million, as I said, for a $6 million per year tax program. So we were able to get a partnership from Berthoud, a small partnership, and work with the landowners a little bit. We had a 3% partnership. With the ATM, we were able to bring in Gates Family Foundation, and with your final grant to bring it all together, and Broomfield's partnership, we reduced our price on the farm by 56% leveraging through public-private partnerships. So with your investment of $230,000 and change, we were able to implement what we think is the state's first perpetual ag to municipal ATM, conserve a 211-acre farm, and supply an M&I water provider with water without drying up a farm, and contributing up to, depending on how you count it, 195 acre-feet towards the state's ATM goals. We're including in our final report, which we're hoping to have to you in the next week or so, a number of lessons learned, and particularly the team of experts was invaluable. Ultimately, this project couldn't have come together without Todd Doherty and Aaron Mesner from Broomfield sitting in a room together and penciling this out. And so we think having a team that knows what they're doing and trusting them is incredibly important. Dedicating the staff time, I shared with John when he came to our celebration, a little bit of fun facts. We had 40 drafts ultimately of the ATM, 9 of which were actually titled final drafts. 8 attorneys were involved. We had 95 team meetings throughout this process and over 6,000 emails. So yeah, it's a big haul, but hopefully from here forward, we will make it easier for the next person. And we certainly don't claim this to be perfect, but we have to start somewhere. And so thank you so much for allowing us to do this.
Questions for Alex at this point in time? Director Yon.
Thanks, Alex, for bringing this to us, and it looks like a great project. So thanks for all your hard work on it. I just had a question. I thought I heard you say that CBT units hadn't been used in this manner, and Northern looked at some policies maybe or something like that. Mm-hmm. So did they develop some policies? And
they did. Yeah, so we worked a lot through the process of informing and trying to offer the perspective of trying to negotiate one of these things and what we'd like to see. Ultimately, they limited the number of years to 3 out of every 10. Although in extraordinary circumstances, you can go back to the board to get up to 5 out of 10 years for the ATM. And otherwise, the water is treated much like if it were sold outright to a municipality. So it counts toward their cap. The assessments are based on the use, those sorts of things. So we were hoping for a few more incentives in the rulemaking, but I think they are looking at that after we brought this to them and they saw that we did have to sell a good chunk to get it done. So, yeah.
Director Goebel.
Thanks for the presentation. Looks like a great project. We have an ATM in Arkansas, and so I'm fairly familiar with them, but is there a mechanism to maintain return flows, or is that not necessary because it's Trans Mountain water?
Yeah, that did come up, and that's kind of one of the things here. You can't please everyone. So we looked at that. A CBT doesn't have return flow requirements, as you said, but we are working with the ditch company to increase our deliveries and delivery efficiency. And so hopefully we can do some of that. In an average year, only about 40 acre feet of water are being diverted from the farm. So while it is a loss, it's not as substantial as it appears on paper with 115 units. Yeah.
Other questions? Great presentation. Thank you. Todd, would you like to address the board at this time?
Morning, Todd Doherty for the record. Thank you for the opportunity. I won't take much time at all. Just really thank board for the support on this. The one point I'd like to make, and which Alex did, but just to reiterate, bringing together these two separate interests. You have the land conservation community coming together with the water community, which would be Broomfield in this instance, and to be able to leverage their resources to be able to get two different things. One's the preservation of a working irrigated farm. The other is to be able to have a supply of water that's certain and is going to be relied upon. And so that is something that hopefully we can do a lot more of in Colorado. And like Alex said, this is it's a pilot project. Hopefully, as we get more and more of these real projects, that the municipalities, the land conservation community, really start to see these types of programs and projects as feasible and something they would want to undertake. I already have heard municipalities who are more interested in maybe exploring these than when we were initially interviewing. So, and just really, once again, thank you for your support on this.
Questions for Todd? Again, thanks to you and both Alex for your presentation today. Very informative.
Thank you.
Craig, are we good for 24?
Sure, we are.
And item number 24.
Yes, for the record, Craig Gabu, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 24A. It is an ATM grant request by the Hart J Center for Experimental Learning at Sylvandale Ranch. The project is the Sylvandale Ranch Agricultural Water Conservation and ATM project. This is an action item. The grant request before you today seeks to implement two types of water transfers, an interruptible water supply agreement, and reduced consumptive use through efficiency measures. The Sylvandale Ranch has a total of 259 Colorado Big Thompson units and 2.5 handy ditch shares. Considering the high value of CBT water and that they are exempt from return flow obligations that native water is subject to, this project seeks to maximize agricultural efficiencies to capitalize on this asset while maintaining a productive agricultural operation and protecting the agricultural heritage and community. The two efficiency measures being contemplated for this project include subsurface drip and/or precision mobile drip irrigation. Without return flow obligations with CBT shares, water savings due to efficiency measures can be used to increase yields on existing acreage, expand the overall irrigated acreage, and/or market this excess water to others. The project team will perform a feasibility analysis of the ranch's water needs and provide recommendations on the most appropriate type of water sharing agreement to explore with potential municipal partners. The agreement could include an interruptible water supply agreement 3 out of every 10 years, partial year irrigation, and/or deficit irrigation. In addition, the project team will be looking for strategies that improve the flows in the Big Thompson River, as well as opportunities for public education through the Hart J Center for Experimental Learning and/or the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition. It should be noted that since this project primarily involves CBT units, no water court proceedings are expected in the development and execution of the agricultural municipal agreement. Staff supports the applicant's efforts based on the need to execute additional alternative water transfer agreements and the successful track record of the proposed consultant team assembled. And when successful, this effort will further Colorado's water plan's measurable objectives and critical goals and actions. No issues or additional needs have been identified. If approved, I will be CWCB's project manager. The applicant is providing $180,000 cash match and is requesting $110,000 from the ATM grant program, and staff recommends approval. David Jessup, owner of the Sylvandale Ranch, is here, and is Todd Doherty of Western Water Partnerships. We're all available to take questions or address your concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions for Craig at this time? Director Yon.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig, for bringing this. This may be for you or Todd, but so this is a little bit of a different request, and just so that we're all clear, I'm not sure Colorado Big Thompson shares are exempt from return flows. However, you do get one use, and if you fully consume it, then that's okay with the northern shares. But on the lower river, we pay as part of our dues to Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District only for our return flows, for the return flows of the project. So we don't have any ownership in Northern, but we pay tax to them for those return flows. So there is a return flow obligation associated with Northern's shares, but just so that we're clear, but you can use it and fully consume it, is my understanding. And that's probably why Northern in the other, that's why I asked the question in the other one about the policies that Northern developed. I know they're still trying to work on some of those kind of things. And so anyway, so there's that. And then there's increased efficiency in selling those savings, which seems to be allowable within the Colorado Big Thompson project and the fully utilizing those. But then I was wondering, are you treating the handy ditch shares any differently, and how might you track those? Because I see some things in here that raise red flags once in a while to people when they say you're expanding the overall acreage, and you can't do that with the ditch share. You could do it with the savings maybe. So you're selling savings and you're doing some things that are a little bit different. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, or maybe Todd can talk about that.
I will let Todd talk about that because he's much more of an expert on this than I am.
Again, for the record, Todd Doherty. Also, I would like to also introduce David Jessup, who is here on behalf of the project and is the owner of Sylvandale Ranch, and he might want to talk. But as far as the specific questions, I believe that you, Director Yon, had definitely specified it in a more eloquent way than maybe was in the application. And yes, we're looking at just increasing the efficiencies, which is permitted through with Northern Water, with CBT, and we I don't believe the applications looked at increasing the irrigated acreage, so we're not looking, at least as that was not contemplated in the project, but possibly increasing some yields on the existing acreage. And then you did note that this ranch has handy ditch water, which I don't know. The part of the project is to initially really get the team together and look at the options to be able to see, okay, what kind of water savings might we have, what kind of arrangements, ATM arrangements might we have. There might be some selling, there might be leasing. It really is not determined at this point in time. But one nice thing, which is I think was great, that we switched the agenda items around and that you had the Larimer County project come forward, that had the mix of handy ditch water and CBT. And so, we're actually, so Brown and Caldwell is also part of the team, and a lot of the same team members are there. So we're going to be looking at that. That's also, nothing's predetermined, but just those mixes of, maybe there are some additional handy shares that could be acquired. But the infrastructure on that, it's just kind of farm specific. So did I address your questions, Director Young?
Yeah, I think so. And it makes sense But I did see in here where it says expand the overall irrigated acreage. So that's always a concern with the ditch share.
Sure.
Probably do it with the northern shares, and with the ditches you are required to make up the return flow. So you just need to be careful in how you look at that and make sure that that return flow component, you know, I heard it in the other one as well, in the open space, Larimer County open space. So Director Goebel brought up that question. So that is a definite concern in these, that historic return flows are maintained. You can increase your efficiency, but when you start selling those efficiencies, that's when you can get into trouble. So you can, within the South Platte, it's a little bit different than the Arkansas Basin. You can increase your efficiency on your farm. That's fair. You can't increase your acreage that you irrigate in, and you can't sell that increased efficiency. So those are the two things just to watch out for.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, I had one, Todd, and whoever wants to field this one. You had in there an anonymous donor.
Right. And at this point in time, at the time when we were talking about this, it's a private foundation asked to be not disclosed, but now Gates Family Foundation is the foundation that will be contributing towards the minimum amount is around $20,000 for this grant program. So just to be clear on kind of where I think it said 180,000. It's really, we're looking at 30,000 is what was committed to be able to for the actual grant match. And then the rest would be a loan, which is an interesting aspect of this too, which is we're looking at about 200 or so thousand in irrigation efficiency improvements, and that there would be basically a loan using impact investment dollars to be able to purchase those and install them, to be able to then get that paid back through time. So that's part of the cash match, just to be clear on that.
Other questions? Mr. Jessup, would you like to address the board? And if you could state your name, if you would, please.
David Jessup, co-owner of Sylvandale Ranch, and thank you for the opportunity. I don't have a lot to add except that one of our motivations here is education. We're in the process of learning about these complicated and there's a lot of confusion up our way about what they really involve. When the Larimer County project was done purchasing the farm near Berthoud that also involved a water transfer, there were letters to the editor of our Loveland paper attacking the county for precisely what this ATM is supposed to avoid. In other words, they were attacking the county for squandering and drying up agricultural land, which just goes to show you how much confusion there is out there. So one of the things we're excited about is with this Hart J. Center for Experiential Education is that there can be some public education that goes on in association with this project. So thank you. That's all I have, unless you have questions.
Questions for Mr. Jessup? Thank you for being here today. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm concluded my presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, well, maybe I should make the staff recommendation.
Please do.
Staff recommends approval of $197,250 from the Alternative Agriculture Water Transfer Grants Program to help fund the Sylvandale Ranch Agriculture Water Conservation and ATM project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Director Yon.
Thanks for bringing this. I know maybe I was a little hard on you a little bit, but those are just things to watch out for. And so I appreciate this, and I appreciate the education portion of it as well. So I would move staff recommendation on item 24A.
Motion by Director Yon. Second by Director Gallagher to move staff recommendation, agenda item 24A. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Chair.
Greg. Let's move to agenda item number 26.
The Joe Busto, CWCB staff. This is the Colorado River Weather Modification Programmatic Agreement that was discussed in executive session. Special thanks to Amy Osteg and Karen Kwan and even Eric Sky over the last year as we just worked together and come up with an agreement that worked for all of us. I definitely wanted to show you some pictures because we started with, it's been 11 years and the board started a grant program in 2004, wrote a white paper in 2005, signed formal agreements in 2007. It was kind of slow to get going, but now pretty much every program has a new remote and some observations and things like that. So I wanted to share with that. So all the water districts in this agreement are going to their boards in January, hoping to sign it because we start new processes this summer and hopefully money will come in. There's the recommendation. There's the white paper, formal agreements. They've put in about $3 million to match our $3 million over the 10, 11 year period. And it's about 40% of the funding every year. The other 60% comes from local water districts and ski areas and things like that. So that agreement's a 9-year agreement that we'll sign this year. If you remember, you saw July was a lot of fun. We went up to Crested Butte, and the effort was to get your generators out of the mountain valleys up onto the ridges. And there's a valley inversion, which I talked about at the meeting, but here's a good picture of it. When you're down there in strong temperature inversions, it's hard to cloud seed, so we're getting up on ridges. And thankfully, people like Frank Kugel and Ken Curtis and Winter Park Ski Area, April Montgomery, kicking Telluride around. We've gotten a lot of machines where they need to be in cloud seeding. A lot of neat things that are happening right now. WSRF has been helping because we have budget issues at the CWCB, but they're doing a neat plume dispersion modeling to take a look at their generators down there. We've done another plume modeling study of the Blue River generators and a climatology analysis of where there's good places to seed, like hotspots at ski areas. 10 new remote seeders. Our radiometer's almost paid off. They have a propane seeder on Grand Mesa. And this year, as part of our portfolio, we'll be approaching Vail to kind of extend the olive branch and have the water districts work with Vail and get their first remote seeder, which they haven't had, and they've been operating since 1976. And the River District's a new partner. There's a Mountain Valley generator. Here's our radiometer, just got out a few days ago on Cortez Middle School. It's part of working with Ken Curtis. Radiometers really tells you what clouds to seed and where the juiciness is. So it's a helpful tool. We hope to have more of those. There's a weather station at Purgatory. A couple of high elevation remotes at Vail Ski Area. There's April Montgomery celebrating her Telluride seeder. There's top of the Grand Mesa above Colburn. There's a good one at 9,300. Wonderful weather station at the top of Crested Butte. Brent Newman's kind of leading an effort to get us together to go see this thing this winter and kind of celebrate some of the work we've done. There's another picture of that weather station. That's the Irwin remote you saw on Kevlar Pass above there. And then this cedar is Ken Curtis's cedar near the town of Stoner, Colorado, above McPhee Reservoir. I don't know where we were. It was pretty remote there. I guess Groundhog is close. And then one other thing just for fun is a ceilometer. It's a ground-based LiDAR laser that shoots up and tells you cloud-based. That's on the roof of a municipal building in Winter Park. So when clouds drop down and it's good for seeding, this little R2D2 shows you how to do that. And then again, we did a really neat inventory and assessment. And it turned out when you worked with the contractors and all the local sponsors, they are very interested in modern 21st century programs, and we all want to work towards that. So with that, just a little vision. We'd like more radiometers. Stronger partnerships between ski areas and water districts, retire old equipment down in bad locations and get them in and get them in better locations. And then we've had some interest in the North Platte and the Rio Grande and cloud seeding as well. And just for fun, I had to get Eric for this. No one's seen this and you got to see it. So photographs are all about that perfect moment. Did you capture it? So this is when you get two of CWCB's finest with a bottle of liquid nitrogen on a roof, a rubber membrane roof of a school. So we calibrated the instrument and then we dumped the rest of the liquid nitrogen on there. So what that is a roof cracking all the way across. No big deal. $1,200. We fixed it. Or they didn't care. The school was fine. We learned our lesson. But okay. So with that, I would say staff recommendation is to direct the CWCB director to sign the Colorado River Weather Modification Programmatic Agreement in 2018.
Director McLeod.
I just have one question. Joe, when this agreement was distributed to us last week, it was labeled as confidential. So is it still confidential, or is it available for the public at this point?
I think it's available for the public at this point. We have all got it so that all the states are happy, but we hadn't taken it to our boards. So after it goes to our boards, then I believe maybe it's not yet because all the other boards haven't, but it's gone to our board. And we're done with the language. All the attorneys are happy. All the project managers are happy. I don't see many changes happening to that agreement anymore.
So the answer is it's not confidential any longer.
Ask Karen Kwan. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an attorney.
Well, as you know, we have a vested interest in this program, so I'm just wondering if I can share it with my board.
I would ask Karen Kwan, but I would say yes. I believe we're done.
Brent is shaking his head in the affirmative.
Director Mitchell.
This is a public meeting, therefore it's public at this point.
Well, I don't think the document has been produced at the meeting, just a conversation. Well, I have a new legal opinion that says we're fine.
I don't think we can vote on something that the public can't see. In other words, I agree. I guess I'm agreeing. Even though it was provided in confidence, I don't think we can actually approve it unless it's available for people to see what we're voting on.
Okay.
At this point,
how do we handle that? I'm in a weird spot right here then.
It's not confidential.
Right.
Post it to the CWC website or what do you suggest we do this? Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, in that case, Mr. Chairman, I will move the staff recommendation that the director be authorized to sign the weather modification programmatic agreement.
We have a motion on the floor. Second by Director Goebel. We will have a portion of discussion items. First of all, is there any questions for Joe at this point in time? We do have a member from the public that would like to address us, Mr. Ken Curtis. Good morning.
Good morning. Ken Curtis with Dolores Water Conservancy District. Yeah, since I've been involved in cloud seeding with Joe and the state, I wanted to thank the board. I mean, without state leadership, we wouldn't have a statewide program. For those of us locally, we do need to stay active, but we need the state to give some of the overarching support and funding and leadership and guidance. Recently, Larry Germstead just celebrated 40 years at Western Weather. That's our local seeder. And I reflected a little because before that, he was with Reclamation doing some of these initial studies in the early 70s. Well, since I've been involved, and I think we have a responsibility to invest our money wisely in this action, it is one of the few places we can add to the water supply. And a whole lot has changed since the 1970s. Thank God, you know, polyester and some of the music's gone. But we've got a long way to go to take the small community of cloud seeders and modernize them. And Joe's just gone through a quick list of the things that are happening around the state. So I'm looking forward in this lower basin participation and making it solid will be critical to us long term. That way we can move our program forward because we're looking at our local investments and coming back to the state for leadership and funding. So with that, not having seen the specifics, but knowing that this board is the most educated on this topic that I've ever addressed, trust me, a lot easier than the Water Resource Committee over the summer. But having said that, I really appreciate your support, and let's lock up our lower basin funds and move forward. Thank you.
Questions for Ken? Director Hawkins.
It's more just of a comment. Would you agree that Stoner is not that remote for our area?
No, not remote at all. Not for our area. Joe was lost. I was not.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the comments today. Go ahead, Joe. We have staff recommendation. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? I will call for the vote at this time. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Let's move to agenda item number 27.
Brent Newman, CWCB staff. I'm going to kick off the discussion of agenda item 27, lease fallowing pilot program. Just as a brief refresher for the board, I'm going to talk briefly about the history of the pilot program and kind of where it came from legislatively. House Bill 13-1248 was signed into law by the governor on May 13, 2013, and authorizes this board to administer a pilot program to test the efficiency of fallowing leasing as an alternative to permanent agricultural dry-up. The program was expanded in 2015 by expanded the allowed uses of the leased water to include ag, environmental, industrial, and recreational uses. And then last year, House Bill 17-1219 expanded the program through 2023. Legislation authorized or charges this board in consultation with Kevin Ryan and the State Engineer's Office to establish the criteria and guidelines for the application, selection, and approval process for these projects. These iterative processes in which the criteria and guidelines document have been updated were created with the intent to establish a streamlined and efficient process for the approval of these projects. This board approved the Catlin Canal fallowing leasing pilot project in January of 2015. And in 2016, over 400 acre-feet of water was supplied to the 3 participating municipalities through the implementation of this project. And back in March of 2016, I think, this board got a tour of that project led by Director Goebel. Peter Nichols is with me. He's special counsel for the Lower Arc District, and he's going to discuss the potential reconvening of the Criteria and Guidelines Technical Committee and how that streamlined process I mentioned earlier could potentially be amended to encourage pilot projects in other basins outside of the Arkansas. Unless Director Ryan has any additional comments, I'm going to have Peter come up.
Questions for Brent this time? I don't think so. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. I'm Peter Nichols. I'm water attorney, Burke Hill, Greenleaf, and Rashidi out of Boulder, Colorado, special counsel to the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District and the Lower Arkansas Valley Super Ditch Company Incorporated, as well as a water attorney that practices around the state and particularly in the Rio Grande Basin. As Brent mentioned, the Catlin pilot project was approved by the board in 2015. We submitted the report after the 3rd year of operation 3 days early. So it's actually working very smoothly. As part of the criterion guidelines, the CWCB staff, and really under the direction of Kevin and with the help of Kelly Thompson, the modeler in the state engineer's office, developed what's called the lease fallowing tool, which is sort of this streamlined spreadsheet approach to develop conservative estimates of consumptive use and return flow obligations that can be used in the lease fallowing program to facilitate fallowing of land and leasing to municipalities. That tool has worked very, very well. It has been amended a couple of times as we've gone along, and what I'm going to suggest is it probably needs to be amended again. I'm working with a group in the Rio Grande that is interested in fallowing some land and leasing that water to replace well depletions, which will be required when the state engineer's new well replacement rules go into effect in the Rio Grande sometime in the next year or two. The lease fallowing tool, unfortunately, has an ET factor that's specific to the Lower Arkansas. If you apply that ET factor to the elevation of the Rio Grande, the amount of consumptive use that could be transferred plummets, and it makes it very unattractive for the ranchers to consider leasing their water to replace well depletions over in the Rio Grande. So what I'm hoping and suggesting is that the working group be reconvened between the CWCB, the state engineer's office. I think there were 15 or 20 engineers who were involved in this, and Kevin deserves a lot of credit for herding some very contentious cats through that process. As you can imagine, you've got 18 engineers in a room and you've got at least 23 different mutually exclusive ideas. So like to suggest that that be done so that this could be used in the Rio Grande Basin and possibly consider at the same time a way to deal with this so that it isn't necessary for the CWCB to revise its criteria and guidelines every time this is used someplace else. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention, and so I'm happy to answer any questions on that. And then I have one other thing I'd like to bring you up to speed on.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I didn't want to jump out so quickly in front of any questions, but I think I can add one thing to what Peter told us. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the compliment. He used the metaphor of herding cats. I would say I was just smart enough to hitch my wagon to the right team, and I wish I had Don Brown here to hear me use that metaphor because he likes those. But I'll also say that I want to take you back as the board to remember that the legislation that enabled the fouling leasing pilot projects and the accompanying criteria and guidelines called out specifically the need to pilot a streamlined methodology for determining the historical consumptive use of a water right and a water right transfer. As we were working through the criteria and guidelines very early on, we realized that we did have a task there that was more than just documenting process and procedure. We had an engineering task in front of us. That was the basis for the forming of that technical committee. And again, some very strong engineers from our office, the Division of Water Resources, and from the consultants, and Jack Goebel, of course, was on that team. That's what made it all work very well. And it does work well in the Arkansas, but we did end up with something that does not work as well outside of that area at different elevations, particularly. And so that is why Peter is here today. And I'm supportive, and I will also commit State Engineer's Office resources again to facilitating that process if that is, I believe that's appropriate. Our resources could help facilitate and contribute to that process again. So that's my comment on that, and I'll let you address any other questions you might have.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Other questions of Peter at this point? Director Hawkins.
How far are you proposing to expand the program? Are we looking statewide? Are we looking at expanding into certain basins at this point?
The program is actually authorized statewide. There are limitations. I think there's a total of 15 projects that could be approved by the Colorado Water Conservation Board, no more than 5 from any of the major Colorado River basins, and there are prohibitions against using a project to move water across the Continental Divide or outside of the Rio Grande Basin. The projects can be used for municipal, industrial, agricultural, and environmental purposes, and they can run for a maximum of 10 years. They need to be proposed now before 2023 to the Colorado Water Conservation Board. There's a 2-step process. The first step involves the selection of a project, and then if the board agrees on the selection of the project, then the applicant prepares a very detailed application to the board. That is out for public review for about 90 days. Then there is a meeting of the water engineers, of everybody who's interested, attended by the state engineer. And then the state engineer makes his determination and recommendations. For the Catlin Pilot Project, 59 terms and conditions, I think, came out of the state engineer's office, and the CWCB added 1. So when the CWCB took action in early 2015, we had 60 terms and conditions added to the operation of the pilot project to ensure that there would be no injury for anyone else. The spreadsheet model, the lease fallowing tool that Kevin referred to and that we've been talking about, was intentionally conservative. And as we reported in all 3 of the reports on the Catlin Pilot Project, it may be it's probably a minimum of 10% conservative in some years and maybe as much as 40% conservative in other years. We designed it to be about 5% conservative. So the notion is you leave a lot of extra water in the river, and that sort of greases the skids to make sure that no one else would be injured who's downstream. Does that answer your question?
Very helpful, but I still am not sure I understand what the proposal is. Is it an expansion on a project-by-project basis?
Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Hawkins, that's a great question, and I will elaborate a little bit more. As Peter just described, this streamlined methodology had to be not just streamlined, or maybe better to say, in order for it to work as a streamlined methodology, it had to be conservative. That is, people could get through it with a less intense level of engineering, with the understanding that it would be conservative, that it would leave water in the stream. Because we were working in the Arkansas at the time, and we had what's known as the HI model, you know about that, the HI model, and maybe just good information on that area. Factors in that streamlined methodology, very specific factors related to the historic consumptive use analysis. As Peter's describing, if you take those factors and use them at a higher elevation, maybe in the Rio Grande, maybe in the Upper Arkansas, perhaps in the South Platte or other areas, then they're likely going to be very conservative. So conservative or conservative to the extent that an applicant would just see that it's not valuable, that they're leaving so much water in the river that this is just not worth it. So what is available is probably an assortment of other approaches that could also be streamlined, but with the application of maybe some correction factors or some other approach could then also be seen as conservative to give the other parties that confidence that, no, this is not going to injure me. I don't need to engage at a high level. I don't need to bring my attorneys and engineers in for a high level of review. I'm fairly confident. Now, of course, there is some review. There is some engagement from the attorneys and the engineers, but there's that confidence there too. So I don't want to speak to the possible approaches. I'll leave that to the experts, a couple of them sitting there in the audience right now. But that would be the approach, is to find a couple other ways that maybe this could be applicable in other basins, streamlined, conservative, and therefore more attractive to other water users. My pleasure.
Other questions? Director Young.
I guess do you have any idea how much time this might take you, Kevin, to do this, or maybe Peter, to reconvene this group? And I guess my question is, how many requests have we had for this pilot project outside of the Arkansas Basin? Is there just one so far?
I'll answer, Mr. Chair, and Peter may want to weigh in on that last part. There may be sort of a catch-22 in your question. How many other applications have there been? Maybe not so many, just because of the concern Peter raised, and that I just reiterated that it's not too attractive because the factors would cause them to be leaving too much water in the river. As far as how much time it would take, I would say calendar time, that may be 2 to 3 months to amend the criteria and guidelines with a streamlined methodology, maybe 4 months. I'm not sure. As far as the actual time spent by resources and person hours, maybe a smaller amount of time, because I think there are concepts that people have already considered, and it would just maybe need to be refined and vetted by a collaborative group of engineers that represent the consulting community and understand the different regions, along with engineers from the state and maybe potential applicants. So I think that it's not as unwieldy as it might seem initially.
It seems to me that some of this, each basin's going to be a little bit different. So trying to adapt it for each basin. I mean, the Rio Grande's going to be, just like you said, a lot different than the Arkansas, and the South Platte's going to be different than that. And if you go on the Colorado River side, it's going to be different. So it just seems to try to catch all of these, it may take a little more time than we're expecting. And I know, some of the farmers in our area have concerns over doing this kind of broad brush approach in the South Platte Basin. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Other questions? At this point in time, we do need to answer Peter's request. State Engineer Reiner has graciously donated their time into this. I kind of need a head nod from board members for the working group reconvening. Is that agreeable to direct staff to do that? I see an overwhelming yes, so that we wanted to.
I like head nods.
There we go.
Thank you very much. This is an important aspect of trying to move forward the Colorado Water Plan in terms of trying to figure out alternate ways of being able to share agricultural water through a leasing program with municipal and other uses. There's one final thing that I'd like to bring up, if I may have 2 minutes.
You bet.
The Catlin Canal pilot project has been operating for 3 years. It's scheduled to operate the coming year. Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District and the Super Ditch are working on three other projects. One would be environmental, one would be recreational, and one of the things I'm working on in the Rio Grande is this replacement of well depletions. So we've tweaked House Bill 13-1248 a couple of times since it was adopted, as we ran into things that we thought merited possible piloting under the approval of the CWCB and the approval of the State Engineer's Office. And we've come across a couple of others that we hope to be able to do in the Lower Arkansas Valley, and I think also may be applicable in the Rio Grande. And these are things that appear prominently in the Colorado Water Plan in terms of using ag water to meet some of our future needs without permanent dry up. One of those is deficit irrigation, and another one is split season leasing. So Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District is working with a couple of legislators to add about 6 words to House Bill 1248 to authorize pilot projects that would allow us to test out those concepts in the future. That bill has not been introduced, but I just wanted you all to know. I'm not sure when the sponsor will introduce it, but I didn't want you to be surprised since this is your program. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Director Yon?
There's lots of things that go into the legislation, and I heard you mention the deficit irrigation, and CSU extensively looked at that on the South Platte Basin with Parker Water and Sanitation District, and it's can be difficult to do because there's a lot of recording that needs to be done and monitoring and that kind of stuff. So it's deficit irrigation is a tough in a mutual ditch company, just because of the way a mutual ditch company operates, where another shareholder can use another shareholder's. So without drying up and showing that dry up, it can be really difficult. So that may be somewhat difficult to do. I just thought I'd mention that.
We understand that, and before proposing this, we had a meeting in Kevin's office with Kelly Thompson, who's here, and his modeler to talk about practicalities of being able to do this. And I think the conclusion was, yeah, there's some complications to do this, but we can probably figure it out. And it is something that people keep saying is a possible solution, one of the tools in the toolbox. So we ought to try it out. We ought to be able to try it out. So.
Other questions for Peter? Dr. Stolp.
Peter, would this fall within that 5 pilots in each of the major basin type?
Yeah, there would be no change in the number of pilot projects in any basin or in any of the other provisions of the law whatsoever.
Other questions? I don't believe so. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much for your time.
Brent, do you have a wrap up? No, that's it. All right. I believe we are completed with agenda item number 27. One brief announcement before we do go to lunch. Lunch is unfortunately just for board members and staff. Let's be back in our seats at 1 o'clock, and we are in recess until 1. Thank you.